all the classy girls go to Bumble.
It's true. You go from Tinder to Bumble, immediate difference. Instant difference.
I wouldn't know.
The quality of women on Bumble is way beyond. So I would recommend maybe you check out the Bumble.
Or maybe we just go to the combat zone.
Right.
Find the woman of our dreams down there.
So we're doing those tours now. You can go on a tour.
Give me your promo.
You can go on a tour. It's olddirtybostontour.com. And we'll actually walk you around the old combat zone. And we use viewfinders. You can stand on the corner and you can actually like see what the streets used to look like.
Whoa.
Like in the 60s and the 50s. And while we're starting the tour, swear to God, a hooker walks up to a guy middle of the day and just starts grinding on him. And like, making a play for him. And she looked like a disgusting hooker. She was a midday hooker. I'll put it that way.
Hashtag living on the edge.
Right. So they're still out there. It's still grimy as fuck in the combat zone.
Can you elaborate on what the combat zone is for the uneducated?
The combat zone was Boston's red light district, and it was actually zoned by the city because back then you didn't have the internet. You didn't really have access to like watch pornography. And they realized that pornography was becoming a thing, and it was sort of going to spread out around the city. And they said, okay, we know we can't stop this, but let's just isolate it. I think it started in the 50s. Old Scully Square, which is now Government Center, used to sort of be where most of the bars and like burlesque joints were. And the city just basically flattened the West End. And once they did that, that whole neighborhood of vice was wiped away, and they reinserted it into the combat zone, which is on the edge of Chinatown now. It's Washington Street and Neeland. There were all these like old theaters, the Pilgrim, the Naked Eye. And if you talk to anybody over the age of 40 in Boston, they should know what the combat zone was. Did
the government gift it the name of the combat zone, or that was just kind of like a culture thing?
I don't know if it was ever like an official government term, but it was because so many of the people that would go there were soldiers. So like guys would come in on ships for military leave, things like that. And so there would be like Marines and sailors and Army guys. That's where like the military guys would go first to sort of get their jollies.
Pilots.
Oh yeah, everybody. So that's where the combat zone name came from. And if you go online, you can do some Google searches, look at like combat zone images. There are only a handful of photographers that were in there doing street photography, but the ones that did captured unbelievable images. I mean, it just sets the tone instantly as soon as you see it. They're beautiful. They're in black and white. A guy named Jerry Berndt, Berndt. Check out his stuff, and you'll definitely be impressed with it.
What initially drew you to being fascinated by this stuff? Because I think a lot of people in the city... One, there's this connotation in Boston right now that Boston's historically like this racist, really like grungy city where you had this group of Irish people who were inherently racist to black people, and there was this racial unrest that still hasn't totally been resolved. And then there was this huge mob influenced both Irish and Italian. And so I think a lot of people like it, but their knowledge of it is probably based around The Departed and Black Mass and the town.
Yeah. I think that it wasn't a myth. I think that this city was very racist. And there was kind of a root of that, and it's not completely wiped out. I was at a wedding a couple weeks ago, and a guy said the N-word to me in conversation, thinking that it was okay. Yeah, it was just, he doesn't recognize what's wrong with that.
It was a white dude?
Yeah, it was an old white guy.
There's nothing more
It was a white guy like in his 60s.
When someone says that.
And it was like, I was shocked. I was blown away. And but that's why it is still there. And so to me, the biggest thing that I could accomplish with these interviews is like flushing that shit out. Because people want to pretend like it used to be racist. Oh yeah, those were problems, but they weren't really based in racism. It was more about the neighborhoods. Guess what, guys? Like, a lot of it was racism, and a lot of it's still here. And I think we're two white guys talking about this, but if you're an African-American person living in Boston, it's almost like you've been gaslit a little bit. Because it's like, oh no, we're not racist. Everything's cool. You have total equal opportunity. But the reality is they didn't. They were actually... even physically like segregated. The neighborhoods that people have been placed in, like Roxbury, Mattapan, Dorchester, people know those as black neighborhoods. You know, Somerville, Charlestown, people know those as white neighborhoods. So that is changing. And I think my generation, especially your generation, a lot of it is washed away where we're not really seeing color. And it's okay. But I think that, you know, people need to realize like they were at a major disadvantage. And that wasn't a complaining thing. That was like a real legitimate problem.
So have socioeconomic issues just always like kind of like lit a fire inside you? Is that like why you do this, or are you just kind of fascinated by like all the crazy shit that used to go on in the city?
I was living in New York for a little while. And it was for work. It was a couple of years. It was no biggie. And when I came back, I realized like how much I miss sort of the tradition of just sitting around with my buddies and telling stories and drinking beers, and that it is different. Like people in Boston have a tradition of storytelling and telling jokes and sort of like ribbing each other that you don't find everywhere. And I was like, you know what? This is special. Like this kid, you know, Brian might not think that anybody gives a shit about the time he, you know, got in a fight with his neighbor or whatever it was. But actually, these are great, entertaining stories and nobody's sharing them. And I saw it as coming from the side of like dirty old Boston. They still have the accent. They still have that I don't give a fuck attitude. They still have that roughness.
Towny.
Exactly.
Would be an appropriate term that people are probably familiar with, right?
Yeah, and so, but now it's almost like towny has a negative connotation. But I'm trying to say like, hey, this personality is you can love it and hate it, but it's an amazing personality. It's like you're not going to find that anywhere else, and it's washing away.
I agree, because my father is Cambridge, has grown up in Cambridge. All of his friends, like the VFW gang, you know what I'm saying?
So you've seen that.
Yeah, I grew up around it. And so I think there's something about the niche of people you're talking about where a lot of them are like blatantly expressive in a much different way than you imagine. You know what I'm saying?
They will test you. They will chirp on you, and they'll push you, and they'll insult you.
It's totally socially acceptable to be wicked abrasive.
Yeah. It's like that's your starting line.
It's awesome.
I mean, you walk in that room, and basically you're going to get hit with a few shots, and people are going to see how you react to that. And some people are so sensitive, and they take that so hard. But if you grew up around that and you know that, you could tell them to go fuck themselves, and it's okay. Like, the ability to maneuver in that environment, in that room, is a special skill set. And if you have it, you're tough.